In a world filled with monsters, you need someone or something to deal with them. To make the world a safer place for all humans. To kill monsters, you need witchers. Alzur was described as a renegade sorcerer, who is seen as the creator of witchers, and therefore one of the most influential mages of all time in The Witcher. To this day, he is renowned for his work with mutations and mutagens, whether it is the effect it has on humans or monsters. Knowledge related to Alzur from the books is kind of limited. We barely know anything about him from the books, therefore this video will also contain additions CDPR has made to his character, which is basically his entire life story. And so, to start the story of Alzur, we first have to go back in time, before he created witchers, to when he was just a baby. Alzur's mother had died shortly after giving birth to him. She was a courtesan from a nearby brothel in the city of Maribor, Temeria. The baby was taken to the doorsteps of a noble estate in the outskirts of the city, where he was left with a note stating that his mother had passed away, and that one of the nobles was his father. None of the noblemen of Maribor that had visited the brothel dared to take Alzur in as their son. No one knew who the true father was, but also none of the nobles wanted to leave their potential child to die. And so Alzur was taken in by nobility as a young baby. Whilst Alzur grew up in a wealthy family, he was missing the love and care parents normally provide. None of the men showed him any affection, as they were afraid it would be an admission of their guilt. Out of pity for the poor young Alzur, the ladies of the court cared for him. But pity wasn't love. His siblings would mock Alzur and refuse to spend time with him, as his mother had been of low birth, making him not equal to themselves in their eyes. As he was cast out by other children, Alzur spent most of his youth reading books and stories. He was absorbed by the stories of wondrous worlds and mighty heroes. He especially liked the book, A Guide to the Chivalric Virtues, written by Sir Matteo of Metna. Alzur was captivated by the deeds of noble knights and the chivalric virtues. He dreamed of becoming just like those heroic knights, as he would wander around the estate and surrounding area in search of deeds to provide his chivalric virtues. One day, when Alzur was a bit older, he was sent to the market to run some errands for the estate, when he came across a wagon which was being attacked by bandits. Alzur saw this as a chance to prove he was worth, and confronted the bad guys. However, reading books proved to not be a valuable form of training when confronting bandits, and several hours later, Alzur was found unconscious, bloody and beaten. This event would have caused most boys to leave the spot behind, but not Alzur. When after a few weeks he was healed, he went straight at it again, and again, and again. Over and over, Alzur would be found beaten up in ditches, barely clinging to life itself. After months of fighting and healing and fighting, Alzur went missing once again. He was found shortly after. However, this time Alzur was unscathed and standing over the corpses of 3 large men, each one's skin burned completely black. Alzur was very gifted when it came to magic, yet he did not know how to control his newfound powers. And thus, out of worry for their own safety, the family called upon a powerful mage to help guide Alzur, to help him control his powers and unlock his potential. This mage they summoned was Cosimo Malaspina, Alzur's master and teacher. In his education, Alzur would, besides getting taught in magical ways, also spend a lot of time learning more about mutations and mutagens, something which Cosimo was heavily invested in. But the idea of witchers would not be on his mind. As Alzur had learned to control his powers, he would travel across the land, killing monsters and bandits. But it still wasn't yet Alzur's intention to create witchers. They weren't his vision. Alzur had never experienced love throughout his youth, only pity. Quite possibly, he chased after danger to help people in the hope that they would love or respect him, instead of feeling pity. But the first one who showed him true love was a sorceress named Lylianna. She was obsessed with the vision of a safer world, one where you would not have to fear for the monsters that might hunt you, where it would be safe to step outside without a beast lunging at you from the shadows. Lylianna worked towards these goals her entire life. Alzur would fall in love and deeply care for her, even giving her a medallion shaped like a lily, imbued with magic to keep her safe. Lylianna's life's work, however, came to a halt sooner than expected, as she died in unknown circumstances. Alzur was overcome with grief and sorrow, and would often get himself drunk and mumble homages of her memory. Lylianna in her life fought monsters with magic herself. Presumably one of these monsters managed to kill her. But her vision wouldn't die with her, as Alzur continued her work in a different approach. Sure, he would often kill monsters when he came across them, but one man can't clear out a continent. You need more to be able to do so. You need witchers. Alzur, together with his former master and teacher Cosmo Malaspina, and his student Idran of Ulivo, would start the work on mutating humans into monster slayers. Their efforts were mostly funded by the Brotherhood of Sorcerers, who were interested in seeing if Alzur would be able to change normal people into sorcerers, if he could open them up to magic. The first experiments were done with adults. However, it quickly proved that the mutations would not work on them, and so they moved on to children. This has been often compared with clay, as adults can be seen as their clay has been hardened and will break when trying to adjust it, whilst a child's clay is still soft and can be molded into different shapes. And so Alzur went on a trip throughout the north, searching for children who he could take with him to experiment on. He would take orphans from orphanages with him and buy children from parents who didn't want them. In total, Alzur gathered 38 children for his experiment, and the training of the future witchers could begin. To get his test subjects in shape, Alzur first needed them to become as physically fit as possible. He also gave them different kinds of mushroom stews and brews to start preparing their bodies for mutations. Throughout the entire process, the children began to deeply resent Alzur, as he was almost torturing them. Several children died even before they started to attempt mutations. Day after day, children would perish on the operation table, their bodies discarded, until eventually the first child survived the mutations, and therefore the first Witcher was born. Only a handful of children survived the mutations out of the 38 that were brought to Rivberg, where the experiments took place. Amongst the first few Witchers were Erland of Larvik and Madoc. Both of them had grown to dislike Alzur a lot, Erland for the torture, and Madoc for his controlling nature. Alzur brought in experts in the fields of sword fighting, alchemy and tracking to train these Witchers to their full potential, and they excelled at every part of their training, except one: magic. The Witchers proved to not be able to cast magical spells that mages used, and this led to the Brotherhood of Sorcerers seeing Alzur's work as a failure. The Brotherhood no longer wanted to fund Alzur's work, as they kicked him out and his Witchers left Rivberg. But Alzur wouldn't give up so easily on completing the life's goals of Lylianna, and thus he took the mutated boys with him to a castle in the Kestrel Mountains named Morcraig. Here the training continued until eventually the first Witchers were ready to set out on the path. Alzur would spend a few decades working on creating new witchers, until it became a process that was able to move on without him. Alzur would move on to different projects, leaving his Witcher order behind. In the decades after Alzur had left the Witchers, slowly problems started to arise, leading to the downfall of the order and the creation of Witcher schools. But what was Alzur doing at that time? Well, he was fighting a war. Temeria had been in a civil war for generations, the main conflict between the dukes of Elander and Maribor. And seeing how Maribor's side was Alzur's family, and how he grew up with them, it doesn't take much to predict that he would support them in their claim. The war dragged on for such a long time, and so many lives were lost, that Alzur was convinced he needed to end this war as soon as possible, before more generations of people would lose their lives. And so he entered the battlefield against Elander, and made the decision to wipe out their army, to stop all the potential killing that would take place in the future. Fire started raining from the sky, as a large portal opened up, from which came the V. This terrible, enormous centipede was created by Alzur, using his spell Alzur's Double Cross, and it was a horrific monster in every sense of the word. Almost the entire army of Elander was wiped out in that battle, forcing them to surrender to Maribor, allowing Duke Adalbert of Maribor to claim the Temerian throne. With the war being resolved, Alzur would move on to his next project, which seemed to have to do a lot with traveling around and helping people. At some point in his life he met a girl named Galanthea, who he saved from monsters after these beasts had killed everyone she ever knew. They would meet again a few years later, but Galanthea managed to get cursed, and after some slight problems he had with her at first, mostly that he found her a bit annoying, he eventually learned to see her like a friend.
I like you whether you like us or not.
One day when he was drunk, he told her about Lylianna after Galanthea had found the amulet he had made for her. He was still very much filled with grief and sadness over her death. Galanthea and Alzur would meet several more times. Each time, Alzur would tell her about his work, about the witchers he had made, and how he was proud of them, like a father and his children. Even though the witchers didn't see it like this. A part of Alzur was always out to fulfill Lylianna's vision. However, for unknown reasons, Alzur started working on creating monsters, perhaps in the hopes that his monsters could kill the other monsters. But we don't know for sure. The reason we don't know is because Alzur died at the hands of his own creation, while working in his workshop in Maribor. Alzur once again, for unknown reasons, released the V. Why this happened and if it was intended, we don't know. But Alzur didn't want the beast to run around the city in which he was staying, and tried everything he could, magically, to control the beast. In the final moments, the Witcher Madoc came to Alzur's aid, after he had a conversation with Galanthea, who was now an older woman. Alzur and Madoc weren't successful in their attempts to control the monster, as it eventually broke free, and rained terror on the city of Maribor. Half of the city of Maribor was destroyed by this enormous centipede. Thousands died, and not much but the rubble remained of the old elven structures in the city. The V was said to eventually have made its way south to Dol Durlok, where it is said to reside to this day. But what exactly happened to Alzur? We are told that Alzur was massacred by the V, and although it seems likely that he would have died if the V broke loose, there is no mention of his body being found. Therefore, whilst I assume he died, there is a possibility that Alzur, possibly out of shame, went into hiding for his failure, and how he was responsible for the deaths of so many innocents. But everything at this point seems to indicate that Alzur has passed away. But what do you think? Did Alzur get massacred by the V of Maribor? One of the last things I want to talk about before I end this video is a woman, a bounty hunter named Maxii Van Dekkar. She was one of the cards added to the Gwent Way of the Witcher expansion, and her card tells of her being on the hunt for some very powerful sorcerers. Her art shows paper on the wall depicting Alzur, Cosmo and Illidan of Olivo. We don't know if she eventually managed to kill either Illidan or Cosmo, but perhaps she was in part responsible for the death of Alzur. Maybe she confronted Alzur when he was working on his fee, and her actions of disrupting Alzur might have caused him to release the fee. Maxii was afflicted by the cursed Black Sun, and she was very proud of it as well. So who knows, perhaps she saw this as a way to kill as many people as possible. The problem is that we don't know nothing about her, besides her Gwent card, which makes it kind of hard to see if she could even ever have confronted Alzur and his master and student.
You get a thunderbolt! You get a thunderbolt!
Another little thunderbolt. Sherman, your magic can't harm me. No magic can.
The final thing I want to mention about Alzur is that his voice was said to be very special. He had a voice which allowed him to cast several magical spells, which for most sorcerers would just be plain out impossible to cast. This gave Alzur an extra edge in battle, making him more powerful. But that was it for Alzur. What do you think of this sorcerer? Was he perhaps one of the most powerful sorcerers of all time? Till the next video. Bye.